For 17 years, she scrubbed floors, washed linens, and endured insults in the mansion she believed belonged to strangers. But on her father's deathbed, a whispered truth changes everything. She was never the maid. She was the heir. What follows is a quiet storm of justice, legacy, and long-awaited revenge. Welcome to Stories by Mr. Best, where real emotions meet unforgettable stories. Today's tale is one of quiet strength, long-buried secrets, and poetic justice. Imagine serving a family for 17 years, only to discover the house you cleaned was always yours. Before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that keep you thinking long after they end. I don't remember the exact day I arrived at the mansion, only the way the gravel crunched under my worn shoes and how everyone looked through me, not at me. I was 8, skinny, scared, and silent. They called me the help before I even knew what that meant. They never told me I had a last name. To them, I was just the girl, the one who cleaned up after their children, scrubbed their mistakes off the marble floors, and served them tea like a ghost in a child's body. No one asked why I never went to school or where I slept at night. I slept in the storage room beside the kitchen, next to the mops and bleach. 17 years is a long time to live in silence. Long enough to memorize the family's habits, the time Mr. Charles had his brandy, the way Mrs. Lorna liked her towels folded, the insults they threw like confetti when they thought I wasn't listening. I learned to be invisible. It was safer that way. If I moved too slow, I got a slap. If I moved too fast, I was called suspicious. I stopped trying to be perfect and settled for being unnoticed. They thought I was stupid, that I was born to serve. But I listened. I remembered everything. I used to look out the window of the laundry room and dream. I'd watch other girls laugh with their mothers, watch boys ride their bicycles across the estate's lawns, while I scrubbed uniforms I would never wear. At night, I'd press my ear against the wall to hear the family talk about school recitals, vacations, inheritances, and who would get what when Mr. Charles eventually died. My name was never mentioned. Not once. I began to believe I really was nothing. That maybe I had come from nowhere. That maybe I deserved the silence. But deep down, something always burned, a question without an answer. Why me? It was the cook, Mama Doreen, who showed me the first kindness I ever knew in that house. She'd sneak me leftovers when no one was looking. Sometimes she'd sit beside me during her breaks, tell me stories about her childhood in the hills. She used to say, "Child, the world turns in circles. One day, the top becomes the bottom, and the bottom rises." I never believed her. Not until the call came from the hospital and shattered everything I thought I knew about my life. The nurse said, "Your father is dying. He asked for you by name." I almost laughed. Surely, she had the wrong number. But she repeated it. First name, last name, names I hadn't heard together since I was a toddler. A name I didn't even know I remembered. I hung up the phone and sat still for a long time, letting the words sink in like slow poison. My father, alive, and dying, and asking for me. I didn't ask permission to leave the house. I didn't pack. I just left. I walked to the bus station with nothing but the memory of that phone call echoing in my mind. The hospital was 3 hours away in a town I didn't recognize. When I got there, the halls smelled like antiseptic and regret. Room 209. I'll never forget it. I stepped inside and saw a man I barely recognized. Weak, sunken eyes, face like paper. He turned, and even though he could hardly breathe, he smiled when he saw me. "You came," he whispered. I wanted to scream at him. Ask why he abandoned me. Why he let them treat me like garbage in a house that wasn't theirs. But I said nothing. My throat locked up, and I just stared. He reached for my hand, his skin cold and fragile like old leaves. "I'm sorry," he said, barely a whisper. "They kept you quiet, because you were the true heir. I signed it all to you. The mansion, the land. It's yours. You were never meant to serve." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, numb, as he fumbled for a crumpled envelope beneath his blanket and pressed it into my hand. "The deed, it's yours. Forgive me." Then he closed his eyes and never opened them again. I walked out of that hospital room with the envelope pressed against my chest like it was made of glass. I didn't speak to anyone. I didn't look back. My heart was pounding, but my face didn't show it. I had gotten too good at hiding feelings over the years. Still, something inside me had shifted. A quiet storm was building, steady, silent, and unstoppable. The streets felt different as I stepped outside. For the first time in my life, I wasn't a servant running errands. I was someone walking towards something that was mine. When I got back to the mansion, no one noticed I'd been gone. No one asked. Mrs. Lorna was shouting at the gardener over some hedge that wasn't trimmed straight. The twins were in the living room laughing at a viral video. I stood in the entrance for a moment, watching them. These people who had never once seen me. Not really. The envelope was still in my hand. I didn't open it in front of them. No. I took it to the laundry room, sat on the same bench I'd cried on 100 times before, and slowly peeled it open. Inside were 2 documents. The deed to the estate, signed and notarized with my name spelled clearly at the top, and a sealed letter. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. It was written in my father's handwriting, shaky, but legible. To my daughter, I failed you in more ways than I can count. But I hope this is a start. I gave the house to you years ago, when I knew the truth would one day matter. They all thought they could bury your name, but I never changed it. This estate is yours. The lawyer listed below knows everything. Call him. Take what's yours. They won't see it coming. Your father. It was surreal. For 17 years, I'd wiped their mirrors and polished their pride. Now I held the very proof that none of it was truly theirs. I stared at that letter until my eyes blurred, not from tears, but from a deep, burning clarity. Everything they denied me, respect, dignity, love, I was about to reclaim, not with rage, but with truth. That night, I called the lawyer. His name was Harold Knight, and he answered on the second ring. "I've been expecting you," he said calmly, as if he were waiting 17 years too. We met in his office the next morning. He was an older gentleman, sharply dressed, and every word out of his mouth felt deliberate. He didn't treat me like a maid. He didn't ask me to wait outside. He stood when I walked in. The deed was finalized 11 years ago, he began, laying out documents across the desk. Your father never told them. He didn't trust them. He said they'd find a way to cheat you out of it. He left it to time. To you. I scanned the pages. Everything was legal. Signed. Sealed. Mine. What do I do now? I asked. You walk in there not as a cleaner, but as the rightful owner. And if they question it, you show them the paperwork. And if they still talk down to you, let the court do the talking instead. He smiled gently. Would you like me to deliver the notice on your behalf? No, I said, standing. I'll do it myself. For the first time in my life, I walked out of a building with my shoulders back, not slouched in shame or fatigue. I wasn't returning to that mansion as a servant. I was returning as the master. The world didn't look different, but I felt different in it. As I stepped off the bus, the mansion stood tall at the end of the lane, cold, grand, and for the first time mine. I walked through the gate, and as I passed the guards, they nodded politely without looking closely. They didn't see the shift in the air. Not yet. I went straight to my room, the storage closet I'd called home, and packed everything I owned into one small bag. Then I walked up the stairs, straight past Mrs. Lorna, who barely glanced at me before barking, "Don't forget the upstairs bathroom today." I turned and looked her straight in the eyes. I won't. But first, I need to speak to everyone in the dining hall. Now. She blinked, confused. Excuse me. I said, now. Something in my voice must have startled her, because for once, she didn't argue. Within 15 minutes, the whole family was seated, confused, half laughing. They didn't know what was coming. I placed the deed on the table, right next to the untouched napkins, and said the words that had waited 17 years to be spoken. This house belongs to me. At first, they thought I was joking. Mrs. Lorna actually laughed, a short, bitter bark that echoed off the high ceilings like a cruel inside joke. Mr. Charles, the oldest son, leaned back in his chair with a smirk, twirling a glass of wine between his fingers as if waiting for a punchline. What did you say, girl? He asked, dragging out the word girl like a stain he couldn't scrub out of his mouth. I didn't flinch. I looked each of them dead in the eye and repeated myself. This house belongs to me. I'm not your help. I'm the legal owner of this estate. And then I dropped the deed on the table like a sword forged in silence. They all leaned in. No one laughed now. I watched as their eyes scanned the document. The color drained from Mrs. Lorna's face first. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the paper and saw my name, my full name, printed at the top in bold ink. Mr. Charles grabbed it next, his lips moving silently as he read and reread the signature line. This can't be real," he muttered, flipping it over like there was a trick on the back. "Where did you get this?" "From my father," I said. "On his deathbed. He left it all to me. The house, the land, everything. And I've confirmed it with his lawyer, Harold Knight." Mr. Charles's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the marble floor. No one moved to clean it. "You're lying," one of the daughters whispered. "You're trying to scam us. You're just a servant." I felt something in me snap, not in anger, but in clarity. I stood taller, straighter. For 17 years, I was the ghost in this house. I cooked your meals, washed your clothes, and listened to your insults. I was here when your mother faked her tears for guests. I was here when you hid your cousin's car keys and blamed the gardener. I saw everything, heard everything. And while you thought I was invisible, my name was written in ink on the title of this house. You mocked the very person who owned the walls around you. Mrs. Lorna stood now, her voice shrill. "You're nothing. Just a mistake your father made. A charity case we took in. You think a piece of paper makes you one of us?" I shook my head slowly. "I don't want to be one of you. I never did. I don't need your blood. I have the law." I reached into my bag and laid down the second copy of the deed, along with the letter from my father and a notarized document signed by the family attorney. "You've got until the end of the week to vacate, or I'll have my lawyer handle it." For the first time in 17 years, they were silent. That silence echoed through the halls long after I left the room. I didn't return to the laundry closet. I went to the main bedroom upstairs, the one with the carved wooden bed, the antique mirror, and the view of the garden I'd never been allowed to enter. I turned the knob, stepped in, and closed the door behind me. Then I sat on the bed. Not as a guest, not as a maid, but as the woman who owned it all. The next morning, chaos began to unravel beneath me. Mr. Charles was on the phone for hours, calling every lawyer he could. Mrs. Lorna cried dramatically in the drawing room, but this time, no one rushed to comfort her. The other children whispered in corners, packing their things with angry disbelief. I walked the halls freely, no longer avoiding eye contact, no longer tucking myself behind doors when they passed. And the staff, those who had mocked me or ordered me around, now stared at me like I was someone else entirely. By the third day, a black car pulled into the driveway. It was Harold Knight. I invited him in and watched as he handed formal eviction notices to the entire family. Mr. Charles tried to argue, but Harold didn't flinch. "The deed is clear. The title is clean. You have no claim here. If you refuse to leave, we'll pursue it in court, and you'll lose more than just comfort." That night, I ate my dinner at the head of the table. Alone. No shouting, no gossip, no tension buzzing in the air like static. Just me, the ticking grandfather clock, and the scent of rosemary chicken made by the new cook I hired that morning. I savored every bite, not because the food was rich, but because I had earned that seat with years of silence, humility, and fire that refused to die. I didn't want revenge in the way they might have feared. No screaming, no throwing people out by force. I wanted something quieter, something heavier. I wanted them to sit in the house they once ruled and realize they were now strangers in it. I wanted them to feel the weight of my name on every document, every wall, every key. I wanted the truth to be undeniable, and it was. I used to think silence was weakness, that it was what you chose when you were too afraid to speak or too small to be heard. But I know better now. Silence is strength. It's patience wrapped in pain. It's every insult I swallowed, every command I obeyed, every room I walked into with my head down even though my name was carved into the very deed they never let me see. For 17 years, I didn't speak up. I watched. I remembered. And when the moment came, I didn't scream. I simply spoke the truth. And it was louder than anything they had ever thrown at me. Each morning that week, I rose before the sun, just like I had for years, but I didn't go to the laundry room or the kitchen. I walked the halls of my mansion like a woman measuring her own kingdom. The staff avoided my gaze at first, unsure of how to greet me now that they knew. Some apologized. Others simply nodded in silence. I didn't need their pity. I didn't need their friendship. What I needed was time. to feel the walls, to remember the pain, and to reclaim each corner one breath at a time. I started with the staircase, the one I wasn't allowed to use because servants take the back stairs. I walked down it slowly, hand on the polished rail, each step a quiet act of rebellion. Then I stood in the main sitting room, where Mrs. Lorna once shouted at me for dusting during her book club. I sat in her favorite chair, crossed my legs, and stared out the same window she used to pretend I didn't exist in front of. It was therapeutic, not in a vengeful way, but in the way an injured limb finally starts to move again after years of stiffness. The house was breathing differently now, because I was. That afternoon, I invited only one person to tea, Mama Doreen. She was the only one who ever showed me warmth when I was a child. She stepped into the dining room like she didn't know if she was allowed. I pulled out the chair beside me and said, "Sit. You don't serve today. You visit." She smiled. Her hands trembled a bit as she reached for the cup. "I always knew you were special, child," she said softly. "But I never thought they'd let you rise." "They didn't," I replied. "But I did anyway." We sat in silence for a while, sipping tea like two women who'd seen everything and survived it. When she left, I walked her to the door myself. I didn't need an audience. I didn't need to prove anything to the ones still upstairs, packing quietly. Their time here was almost up. By the fifth day, the energy in the house was brittle, like glass under tension. Mr. Charles was the last to face me. He came to my door in the evening, his face pale, his hands tucked stiffly into his pockets. "I grew up here," he said. "This house, it's my childhood." "So was mine," I replied, not moving from the doorway. "I just lived it differently." He looked down, ashamed or calculating. I couldn't tell which anymore. "I didn't know. None of us did. You didn't want to know. You had eyes, but you only saw what you wanted. I was the cleaner because it was convenient to believe that. But the truth was here the whole time. You just refused to look at it." He sighed. "You could let us stay? As tenants. We'll pay rent. Just give us a chance to adjust." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "You never gave me a room of my own. You let me sleep beside mop buckets. You let your mother insult me daily. No, you had 17 years of my silence. That was your grace period. Now, it's time for you to go." And I shut the door. That night, I walked the house room by room. Every corner had a memory. Every wall had heard whispers and weeping. I didn't hate the house. I didn't even hate the people anymore. What I hated was how small they made me feel in something that was rightfully mine. But not anymore. I opened the windows in the grand hall and let the night breeze in. For the first time, it didn't smell like furniture polish or cold rejection. It smelled like freedom. I ended the night on the rooftop terrace, the one they told me was off limits. I sat there beneath the stars, arms wrapped around my knees, and smiled not because I'd won, but because I'd endured. That was the true victory. I didn't become like them. I didn't return their cruelty. I just stood in my truth and let it speak louder than their lies ever could. 17 years in silence. But now the house echoed my name. The morning they left, it rained. Not a heavy, dramatic downpour, but a soft, steady drizzle, as if the sky itself had nothing left to say. I watched from the second-floor window as suitcases were wheeled down the stone path, as the family that once ruled this place with smugness and entitlement stood under umbrellas, looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. They didn't slam doors. They didn't shout or protest. That fight had already left them. All that remained was disbelief and the quiet sting of consequence. Mrs. Lorna was the last to leave. She stood at the gate, looking up at the mansion with an expression that hovered between grief and prideful bitterness. For a moment, I thought she might turn around, march to the door, and try one last cruel remark. But she didn't. She just glanced at the brass number on the gate, our family number, and stepped into the waiting car without a word. I didn't wave. I didn't gloat. I just stood there until the taillights vanished into the gray distance. I didn't cry. I thought I might. But there were no tears left. Only clarity. That evening, I walked the halls again, this time barefoot, slow, relaxed. The air was different. The mansion no longer felt like a cage or a stage where I played the role of a silent shadow. It was a canvas now, a space to redefine. I made notes as I went, what walls to repaint, what furniture to remove, which rooms to finally open up. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine not just surviving here, but living. I repurposed the dining room into a library. The upstairs sitting room became a haven for girls from the local shelter, a place where they could study, read, rest. I hired staff, but not the kind this house was used to. I brought in people like me, those who had been overlooked, underestimated, but never broken. I didn't run the estate like a queen on a throne. I ran it like a woman who remembered what it felt like to be silenced in her own home. Weeks passed, then months, and slowly, word got out that the mansion on the hill, the one people whispered about for years, was now owned by the Maid's daughter. Some came out of curiosity. Some came to gawk. But most came to see if the stories were true, that a servant girl had risen to claim a crown no one ever meant for her. They were right. One afternoon, I stood in the garden, barefoot in the soil I once wasn't allowed to touch, watching new flowers bloom where thorns used to choke the ground. A young girl from the shelter tugged on my sleeve and asked, "Is it true this whole place is yours?" I looked around, taking in the windows, the trees, the path I once swept for hours in silence. I smiled. "It is now." She nodded, eyes wide. "It doesn't look like a castle." I knelt to her level. "That's because the Real Castle was never the building. It was surviving long enough to sit in it as yourself." I didn't need applause. I didn't need headlines. I had something more permanent, legacy. Not one born of inheritance or wealth, but one carved from quiet endurance and the will to rise. For 17 years, they thought they were shaping me into something small and obedient. But all they did was sharpen the edge of my silence, until the day I walked into the light and cut through every lie with the truth of who I was. Not the maid. Not the burden. Not the forgotten girl in the hallway. I was the master of the house, and they were just guests passing through. Thank you for listening to From Maid to Master, A Daughter's Inheritance. If this story moved you, challenged you, or simply made you think, be sure to like the video, subscribe to Stories by Mr. Best, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next unforgettable tale. Until next time, stay strong, stay silent when you must, and always know your worth.